We recently did a video shoot in Orange County, and I thought I'd share some behind the scenes as well as some tips that you might be able to implement on your own productions. Now, we travel typically with most of our gear. If it's a shoot like this where it's kind of just interviews, we have the gear required to make that happen on our own that we own. We don't have to rent anything or pick anything up while we're there. We can travel with most of it because thankfully we've gotten to a day and age where cameras are smaller and lighter, lights are more compact, sound systems and everything are much smaller than they used to be. So a lot of the stuff you can travel with, but it is important that you protect it. So having the right cases so that when you check your bags, they don't get damaged, that's really helpful, as well as having a system of how you pack things up. I really like to make sure we follow the same system and procedures for packing up our gear every time we go on a shoot. That way we know we have everything we need, and when we come back, we can make sure that we didn't leave anything behind. So we have specific cases where we put certain things, and that way we can always do a quick double check along with kind of like the mental checklist of everything being where it's supposed to be. Now, I will say this is a special tip. If you're flying with gear, I tend to prefer Southwest. They are the most friendly to media personnel who want to check bags under a media rate. A lot of the other airlines will give you trouble, and you got to go through special hoops and procedures to do it. Southwest, there is a little bit of that, but you can work with them for the most part, and they're usually pretty helpful in terms of understanding that you're traveling with gear for work, and so they can usually figure out a rate for you if you designate that you're media. Now, I wouldn't recommend, checking your clothes or any personal items under media. I would just use it for the video production or photography equipment you're traveling with, but I do tend to recommend Southwest for that. Plus, you get the 2 bags for free compared to other airlines where they're always trying to nickel and dime you every opportunity they get. So we usually travel with the lights and some of the other kind of grip gear in checked bags, because it just tends to be the bigger items anyway, the stands and the lights. So we check all that, and then we usually carry all the cameras and the audio gear on in like backpacks, just so that we have the more expensive stuff on us, as well as any memory cards or anything like that, so that we're not putting it in someone else's hands. Anything that's really important and really valuable, we tend to hold on to. For this particular shoot, we arrived a day early just because the timing made sense, and it gave us the opportunity to set up the day before, and that gave us plenty of time so we didn't feel rushed and we could really evaluate the space. Now, for this particular shoot, we were shooting in kind of a hotel suite, and that was because it just made the most sense for the people we were interviewing, where they were coming from, and it was a kind of nice central spot for everyone to be at that one location. And the goal was to have it look, similar to an office type environment without being a functional office. Oftentimes you go into a place and it's not the most quiet or conducive environment for filming because people are moving around, they're causing noise, and you feel like you're really intruding when you're telling everyone to be quiet or to stop work just for the video shoot. So filming in a hotel room isn't always the most ideal situation, but it can be really helpful if you're just going for something that's more like home or office environment. If it's for interviews, it can work actually pretty well. Now, we did run into a little trouble. Well, it's not trouble. I guess it was just a challenge. The hotel rooms that you're usually this size, you want a bigger space so you can get that separation between your subject and the background. I don't ever like to put my interviewees right up against anything, up against a wall, up against a bookshelf. You'll see people do that sometimes, and I hate how that looks. You want separation between your subject and the background. So you want the bigger the space, the better, usually. And this space was fine. It had plenty of room. And in a space like this, I'd typically put the person right in the center of the room and pick a nice background based on the whatever is in the room to use. And for this one, we were doing 4 separate interviews, and they all needed different backgrounds. Thankfully, this room had a lot of different angles that we could use to achieve that. But using the windows is always going to be a challenge if you're filming, because the sun outside is so much brighter than the interior lights. Even if you bring really powerful lights, it can still be hard to overcome that extra power that the sun just has. It's just that much brighter. And the other challenge with the sun is that it's always changing and always moving. So you got to make sure that if you're going to use the sun, that you're aware of where it's at and where it's going to be during the hours of filming. A lot of that can depend on which side of the building the windows are on and what direction you're facing. So just always keep that stuff in mind. You really want to make sure you're able to track the sun. And thankfully, because we were in a day in advance, it was really easy to tell where the sun would be when we were going to be filming and how the space would look in terms of lighting. So to overcome the issue of having a really bright sun, you can put it's like the sheer drapes that kind of, are commonly found in most hotel rooms. But even that, you'll find that those will blow out fairly easily, even if you are doing a good job lighting inside, which we were. So we brought some window tint along. It's some tint you can find online. I can put a link to it in the description. And it's essentially like a easily removable, kind of thicker plastic gel kind of roll, but it's a long roll, so you can actually get quite a bit of it. I think they sell it even like 100 feet rolls. So that worked really well putting up on the window. And, in a situation where you're doing some window tinting, I don't know if you've ever done it before, but it can be challenging to make sure you get all the bubbles out and that it looks nice. But because we had that sheer drape in front of the window anyway, we were able to use that to kind of hide the tint, so it didn't have to be perfect, but it was still knocking down the sunlight enough. And we even ended up putting kind of a black flag up on one half of the window just to cut the light down even more. So we were able to really darken that window and bring it down to a reasonable level to match with our scene. And because of the time we were filming, it all worked out. As the day went on and the sun ended up going, outside that window, so it was like more direct, we ended up filming the other direction, just blocking off the sun entirely. If you're not using a window, I recommend just blacking it out completely so you don't have any stray sunlight coming in. Now, that's if you're using lights, which I also always recommend you do. You should always light things. That way you get the most control and you can actually make your picture look the best. As for the shoot itself, like I said, we had to do 4 different angles for the 4 different interviews, and it all went really well. This room worked out great. There was kind of a nice little nook space that had a bookshelf and a whole little office, so this room actually worked out really well. I was happy to see that. Sometimes it can be hard judging from pictures on the internet of what a space is going to look like. You got to kind of do your best. If there's a virtual tour or if there's been footage shot in the hotel, sometimes they'll do kind of a video walkthrough. I definitely recommend watching that stuff so you can get an idea of what the space is going to look like and feel like for when you get there. Other than that, there's really not a whole lot else. We did 2 different cameras, shot with the GH4 so that we have the 4K kind of punch in and kind of recrop as needed. When you're doing interviews, you want to make sure you have the most angles possible. And it's just for variety's sake in the edit. And what's really nice about the GH4 is that you can put 2 of them side by side, get them to match, and you can shoot the 4K. So you kind of have that extra punch in if you need it. So you can kind of get, a quasi 4 angles out of it. But most of the time we're shooting 4K and just scaling that down to 1080p for crystal clear 1080, the best 1080 you can get. And that's why, we shoot at 4K. A lot of people lately have been saying that you don't need it, that a lot of people are watching things in 1080 anyway. But I'll say it again, it's really, really important that you always shoot a higher resolution than what you're finalizing in, because even though that camera says 1080, it's not going to be as good as 1080 can actually be if you shoot 4K and scale it down. And there's a bunch of different reasons for that. I made a ton of other videos, so you can watch those. But hopefully this behind the scenes gave you a little insight into kind of how we do a typical interview shoot and the kinds of things that you can do if you find yourself in a similar situation.